Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. The title of today's video and the subject of today's video is how to spot spiritual bullshit. How do you avoid spiritual cowboys, clowns, and con men? So what I'm going to do in this video is take you through just that very fact, like how do you avoid ending up in a situation where you're a victim to clowns, cowboys, but in particular we're going to be looking at spiritual con men and how to ensure that to the best of your ability you avoid these people in your life. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is, first of all, I'm going to be taking you through my personal experience of being conned spiritually. It just happened to be by my father. I'm going to go through that, what I learned from that, why that happened and what I understood from it. And then I'd like to go through defining what is a spiritual cowboy and clown, and I'd like to look at that specifically. Probably not as much detail as then I'd like to go into what is a spiritual con man, because clowns are one thing and cowboys are one thing, but spiritual con men are the really dangerous ones you have to really look out for. And I say con men because, look, there are some con women out there, but more or less a lot of this spiritual abuse is occurring by men. Like it or not, that just seems to be the way that it is. And I'm going to be going through what are the signs to look out for when it comes to spiritual abuse. Like what are the red flags that you should be aware of that you're entering into a relationship that could potentially be very abusive. And then finally I'd like to kind of look at an overview of just the spiritual industry, which it is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, and just more broadly speaking, what are the things to kind of be aware of, and what defines a good teacher, what defines a good teaching. How can you, if you're rejecting these spiritual con men, who are the real people out there? How do you know you're dealing with an authentic, caring and kind person? And, you know, just to give you some pointers in that direction. So it's not just looking at the negativity, we're also going to look about how do you better know a sincere teacher, because we don't want to really throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is also one of the effects of spiritual abuse. So just to begin with, let me share with you briefly a little bit about my story and my history of spiritual abuse or being spiritually conned. Now, I've had an interest in spirituality from a very early age. I've got this certificate that I'm going to present here of when I was 16. I went to Chen Rezik, this Buddhist nunnery, as doing a community service thing. And not that I'm bragging about or anything, but just letting you know that I've been in this search as a seeker for a very long time. I'm 47 now, so that's 31 years ago. And I've had a lot of experiences with spiritual groups, spirituality, and I think as a result of that I've learned a lot of things, a lot of painful things, and I'm really distilling that down for you essentially, and hopefully you won't be able to make some of the same, you won't make some of the same mistakes that I've made. Now, my story of spiritual abuse and spiritual trauma on one level was to do with my father. And so it's a little bit complicated in the sense that it's tied in with a trauma bond and it's tied in with, a dysfunctional family of origin. So it's not just a straight, I met a guru and then I followed him and bad things happened. It's a little more complicated than that. But other aspects of it are as simple as that, where I saw my dad as a spiritual teacher. I saw my dad as a spiritual authority. I followed him, I believed in him, I trusted in him, and I ended up just being very exploited and abused and kind of put through the mill. So I had to come to the realization that not only was this spiritual teacher insincere and narcissistic and kind of terrible, that was also my dad. So it was kind of complicated, but the basic thing I experienced from that was this feeling of the shock of discovering all these years I've been emotionally invested in this person, and what I thought was a sincere endeavor just turned out to kind of be a con. It turned out to be a money-making thing. It turned out to be all about amplifying his ego and his sense of status, all under the guise of spirituality. And it was a very painful experience to really commit yourself, to really dedicate yourself, to really believe in something, to find out the bill of goods you're being sold is faulty. It's just not real. It's inauthentic. And it's painful, and obviously discovering that's also your father just adds another dimension to that pain. But I look back now and think there are things that I should have seen that I couldn't see on one level. I just wasn't able to. I was kind of blind, that pointed to this a long time ago. So I can look from the outside in now and see it was kind of obvious, but when you're in it, it's not so obvious. And often spiritual abuse and guru abuse or these type of things, it does happen slowly. It's not necessarily you walk in the door and then they demand all these things of you. It's a gradual kind of grooming process. And on one level, when you read about narcissistic abuse in romantic relationships, you look at sexual abuse, this grooming, the spiritual grooming process has a lot of similarities to it. And what I'd like to go through, based on my own personal experience, is what are the things you should look out for. And the reason I'm talking about this on a channel related to healing childhood trauma is survivors of childhood trauma are particularly susceptible to this type of abuse. I mean, they're just susceptible to abuse generally. Because if you've grown up in an environment where you felt neglected, you felt unloved, you felt worthless, any person that comes along and says, I can fix that for you, I can take away this pain, I can shift this shame to courage, or whatever it is they're selling, it's going to appeal to you. So in the same way people with a history of childhood trauma can be primed for addiction, also people with a history of childhood trauma can be primed to be abused in spiritual groups, because there is already a kind of a setting on one level that allows that abuser to kind of tap into a need in you that they feel they can fulfill and exploit. And I'd like to really go through how that happens, what to watch out for, and what to be aware of. Now, spiritual clowns and spiritual cowboys are not, in my view, as bad as spiritual con men. Spiritual con men are dangerous. They'll abuse you, they'll screw you, they'll mess with you, they'll leave you emotionally damaged. Spiritual clowns and cowboys are kind of, like they're not good. I mean, you don't want to go out of your way to engage with them, but there isn't that same level of kind of narcissistic malice that there is in spiritual con men. And my definition of spiritual clowns and spiritual cowboys are just people that are full of shit but just don't really know it. They're high on their own supply. They believe their own stuff on one level. And you'll encounter these people, and the worst thing they can do is waste your time and waste your money. And they're kind of, a lot of them are sincere. Now, some may not be, and they kind of border on the con man thing, but a lot of them really do believe in what they're actually saying. But what they're saying, there's a gap between what they're saying and who they are in a way that maybe they're not even necessarily conscious of. And there are degrees of this. So if you search on YouTube, woo-woo chi kung fu fails, you'll see some of these people like this. Now, it's not really funny, even though I laugh at it every time, that poor lady being knocked over like that, but you can see here's someone that has really believed in their own rubbish, basically, and has been knocked over as a result of that. And you can see other kung fu masters that knock people over with just a touch of their hand, and they encounter a real fight and they're smacked in the face, etc. And that is kind of a microcosm of the macrocosm, where there are people out there teaching stuff. And what's sad about that lady, she's probably invested a lot of money and time in that master who's taught her that, and in the result she gets smacked in the face on a beach. And that really is a good little example of a spiritual clown. This is just someone that really has no idea what they're doing, but they're making money from it, they believe it, they really think it's true, but it just has no basis on reality. I remember going to a spiritual sort of conference or health thing, and I was backstage helping a friend that was about to give this presentation, and this woman was on stage doing a lecture on the healing power of crystals and how crystals could heal you, etc. So it was quite an interesting talk. And then she comes off stage and she's backstage. This is obviously at a different time. And she lights up a cigarette and she's smoking this dory like... And I remember at the time just thinking, wow, there is a gap. Here are you talking this thing about crystals and spirituality, and you're at the back of the stage having a fag. So I just thought that was kind of one of my first encounters with the gap between theory and practice, and people who have the words and have learnt the language, but they're not really living out the very thing they're actually teaching, even though they're not necessarily trying to con someone and they're not necessarily trying to manipulate people. They are kind of clowns and cowboys. They really don't know what they're actually doing. And these are people you don't really even waste your time with more than anything else. And there are more slicker versions of this, of spiritual cowboys, people that will take segments of wisdom, slice it up, chop it up, repackage it, resell it. And this is also one of the other issues when it comes to spirituality in a capitalist economy. It's all about making money, and I'll come to this a little bit later on, the problem with this. But you have something like, I'll give you an example, Wim Hof, that is this breathing method that many people are aware of, many people practice, and I'm sure the thing in itself may have value. But the reality of what he's done is he's taken a slice or some aspect of Tumo, which is one of the 6 yogas of Naropa, stripped it of its religious, ethical, and cultural context, and its esoteric context in particular, and just turned it into a health practice. He's given it his literal name, Wim Hof, breathing exercise, a Wim Hof method. He now can do all these amazing, cold things, and it may have in itself a health benefit. But you can take the flavor of apple and create an apple lollipop, and you have the taste of apple, but you are not getting an actual apple. And if you didn't know an apple existed, you could think that's an apple. You could think this apple flavored lollipop is an apple. But what you're getting is a distilled, extracted taste of something that isn't actually the real thing. And that's going on all the time in modern spirituality. We hear of cultural appropriation, of people taking parts of other cultures and making them their own and appropriating without really acknowledging the original source material. But we have all of the self-help, most of the self-help New Age movement is religious appropriation. People take bits of religious traditions, strip them of everything, and then call them this thing. It's particularly with mindfulness, McMindfulness, where you can get to the point now where you can be CEO of a weapons manufacturer, make billions of dollars from assisting in the murder of people, and you can be doing mindfulness every day, and you can be doing that job more calmly, more effectively, more self-aware, thanks to mindfulness. And that's kind of where we've got to. And to me, people selling that are cowboys or clowns. They're just coming up with business ideas, they're stripping things of their original source, charging for it, and they may believe in it, and maybe, I'm sure there is health benefits from what Wim Hof is selling, but to me there's a cowboy, clown vibe to that as far as I'm concerned. It's not the real thing, because the real thing doesn't have a TM on it. It's taught within the context of it, what it arose from, and there's that level of authenticity to it. So that to me are spiritual clowns, spiritual cowboys to avoid.